Wonderful. So my name is Anjali Mahendra. I'm the Director of Research at the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. I'm just going to try to keep things moving along today. And again, really grateful that you all could join in a timely way. We will do introductions and all of that, but before we get into this agenda for today, I wanted first our Regional Director of Africa, Wanjira Mathai, to open this whole webinar. And we have an agenda that we shared with you all. We will have our Global Director of the WRI Ross Center, Ani Dasgupta, make a few remarks, and then we will launch into some of the content for today. But with that, I just want to hand it to Wanjira first, and then Ani, and then we will go around doing some introductions before we get into the content, if that's okay. Wanjira, over to you.
Thank you, Anjali, and thank you everybody for joining us. It's really a milestone for us at WRI that this report and the insights that it gives us about a more equal city and what that takes and the ambitions that all of us have to see our cities more equal. I could not be more pleased. Over the 4 years that the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities has been working so hard to create an opportunity for us to make a mark on cities and what we see now as urban landscapes. Really proud that for WRI Africa, our strategy puts at the heart of it the thriving, resilient cities, because we know that those urban landscapes in many ways will drive the future of our countries, both as far as the future of climate is concerned. Economies are driven from there, and most people will live in cities, as the data are now telling us. So we know that one of the metrics that completely always inspires me is the fact that we know that the infrastructure that we need for most of our cities by the year 2050 has not yet been built, has not yet been conceived of. And the opportunity we have, therefore, to inspire what that looks like is a really, really great opportunity. So for all of us who are working in this space, and for those who have made the time to be part of this webinar today, this is our opportunity to begin to shape the equal cities of the future. And I couldn't be more pleased to be part of the team that will be driving that work in Africa. Annie and your team, thank you so much for putting this agenda at the forefront of WRI's work. And this report is a work of great pride for all of us. So thank you and welcome everybody. I look forward to the next 3 hours.
Thank you very much, Wanjira. Thank you, everyone. I just can't tell you how grateful we are that you joined us on this new format. And I really want to tell you from the team's perspective, actually, we are really sorry and sad that we are not holding this real workshop. We've been preparing for it. I know a lot of you, I don't know, all of you have been really looking forward to spending some time together on a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. So we're sorry about that, but I'm so glad you have taken and joined us here. And as Anjira said, maybe this is something we all need to learn, how to do this better, how to do this virtual global meetings better. I would like to encourage you, if all of you, if you can, turn your video on, even if you're wearing your pajamas, it's okay. Because it's nice to feel that we're in one room, you know, even if you're not. I would like to encourage you. I'm not insisting. It's just wonderful to see your wonderful faces. My name is Ani Dasgupta. I head the cities team, the Ross Center at WRI. I just, besides very warmly welcoming you, I just want to say 2 sentences about why are we doing this piece of work? And we've been doing this for a few years. And I just want to underline, you know, about 5 years back, all of you who work in cities, you know, cities became part of the global discussion. It wasn't part of the global discussion. You know, it became part of the global discussion. Now you can't go to a conference of any nature, whether it's food, health, that cities are not discussed. And it happened mostly because of the climate discussion, actually, around in Paris. It became a very important part. There were 400 mayors in Paris who came for the first time in a climate discussion. And this is actually much welcome for all of us who work on cities. We want the world to realize how important it is to get cities right. And while the discussion, which was much more welcome by people like me, you, and all of us, we felt the discussion was kind of skewed in a way. Climate, of course, is important. It's something we all work on, but it was very focused only on climate. And the cities we work in, cities all of you work in, live in actually in Africa, climate is important, but two other things seem to be much as important. One is cities are growing everywhere at a pace, unprecedented pace, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa. And you can see that urban services are not keeping up. Most people living in cities are not actually getting services they need, they want. All of us are breathing pretty polluted air. So how do cities actually figure out how to do these services? And the second thing that is obviously clear, that a massive number of people are living in cities, will continue to grow. Cities, and as you all know, the sub-Saharan African cities are continue to grow the fastest actually in the next 20 years compared to other places. And which means that all these people will need employment, jobs. Cities need to be productive. It's a place people can invest and employ and create jobs. And while they're doing these two things, they need to figure out not only how to be low carbon, but more importantly, how to deal with already impacts of climate change. So all these three different things were happening to cities at the same time. A lot of the cities we work in, I'm sure a lot of cities you guys work in, have very little resources. Very little public resources to do these things, and that's not increasing. So the question in our mind, and that's what you will hear all day today, is given the circumstances, given the circumstances city leaders face right now, people who run cities, citizens who live there, how do we help them think this through in a way that is comprehensive, and also help them figure out how to prioritize? You can't do everything at a time, but what is the best thing to do? What is the strategies that will help your city actually get across and meet this challenge? That is the motivation, focus on cities in global south, that led us to start this work. And as Manjira said, our last 4 years, and Anjali, who's our research director, who's leading this work absolutely fantastically over the last 4 years, will after me, will give you an overview of where we are. Where we are is we have done a lot of this work. Actually, we're in the moment, we are trying to summarize this work, let's conclude this work. This meeting is for us to hear from you, tell you where we are, what we have heard, but actually seek your advice. How is the best way to synthesize this that will be most impactful for people whose mind we want to change? So that's where we are. Our underlying thesis that we have arrived at, that Banjira mentioned after doing all this, that cities need to actually think about how everyone in the city is served. That is the core to success here. That's our hypothesis. Of course, we will discuss with you that we think the inequity that is held in cities, not just income, but in services. That is not people getting to their jobs they need to, not getting their kids' education. That is core to something cities need to think about as a driver to how economic development can take place and how low carbon growth can take place. So that's where we are. I really want to thank you. And as you can imagine from my summary of where we are, we were very keen to hear from you and see how best we can move forward. We have great ambition and plan to work with Wanjira and expand our program in cities with all of you. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I can't thank you enough for joining us. Over to you, Anjali.
Thank you so much, Ani. And I see a lot more people have joined. So welcome. Good evening to all of you there. Across African countries, multiple African countries represented here among the participants. Before we launch into the discussion of the report and its findings, as Ani was saying, can we maybe have a round of introductions? We'd love to hear from you all. If you could just tell us, your name, the organization you work for, the location you're in, and maybe just very quickly what your interest was in this workshop, in this topic. Maybe we can just start right at the top. Maria, do you see a list of participants? Maybe we can just go down the list and
Yes,
moderate.
I do. Yep. Should we just do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be easy if you just call on people so that people know.
So Kofi Yaboa is up first.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Kof.
Yes, we hear you.
Hi,
Hi.
hi. Okay, so I'm here together. I think this webinar is very important to us. I work at the Second Takoradi Metropolitan Assembly in Ghana, and we're looking forward to our climate action plan. And this workshop is very important to us to make sure we can make input to the report, as well as also pick some essential things that can help our city to catch up with this urban challenge. I'm here with a team of other colleague planners so that they can listen into it and then we make an input. Thank you.
Great. And then we have the name Akiba Mashinani. I'm not exactly sure who is on the end of that call. If you want to unmute yourself.
I think you're unmuted. Could you just hit the unmute button?
Let's see.
That may be Jane.
Yes.
It's not muted, is it? It is not muted. Can you hear me?
We hear you now.
Yeah.
Now we hear you. Thank you.
So I'm Jane Weru, and I work for Akiba Mashinani Trust. I'm an advocate by training.
And you're based in Nairobi, correct, Jane? Is that right?
Yes, yes, yes. I'm based in Nairobi.
Great. And then,
is there anything? Should I add anything more?
Akiba, it might be good to know the connection, or rather, Jane, the connection Akiba Mashinani has to the cities, resilient cities agenda.
We've been working for many years with the city of Nairobi and the government of Kenya to provide infrastructure and projects in informal settlements in Nairobi. And right now we are working on a planning process with the city county of Nairobi, where we are planning for 100,000 households in a slum settlement called Mukuru here in Nairobi. So I am supporting that process. I'm coordinating it. So we've mobilized 41 institutions, both universities, private sector, civil society organizations, government departments, to assist to bring in their knowledge and resources to support the planning process.
great.
Sorry?
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're glad you're here. And then Chris Buckley is next.
Right, good afternoon, good morning everyone. Chris Buckley from University of KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, South Africa. My role in this project is that we support the eThekwini municipality in the rollout of their water and sanitation. We have been funded for many years by the South African Water Research Commission, and we currently are hosting the Gates Foundation Engineering Field Testing Platform for Reinvented Toilets. So we have a fecal sludge laboratory, which we've supported many laboratories through the Global South in analyzing fecal sludge and understanding it, and then understanding the different kinds of sanitation systems which are unsewered or non-sewered, also understanding the interaction between water supply and sanitation, and the two of them have to be in harmony, otherwise you have a problem. And with me here we have the Mgeni Water postdoc on sanitation, and so he's over there, and that's Sam. Anything else at this stage?
No, thank you, Chris. I should just add, Chris was a reviewer for the sanitation research that we did as part of this whole effort. I was introduced to Chris when we launched this WRR work many years ago, 2016, at the Habitat 3 Keto conference. So he has probably watched this work develop the longest of anyone here.
Thank
yeah.
you. We have Edlam Yamaru online. Is Edlam online? Let's see. It looks like you are muted. Let's see if we can. Edlam, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon. Yes, this is Edlam Yamaru. I am with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I lead the work of the Economic Commission for Africa on urbanization and development. And in this capacity, I manage the delivery of support, technical assistance, and knowledge development to African member states on urban policies and strategies. And our specific entry point is to work with ministries of finance, planning and economy, and other sectors such as industry, agriculture, and trade to strengthen the integration of urban and spatial considerations across all those sectoral policies at the macro scale. So this work of WRI is of obvious interest for us and for our work, and I'm glad to be part of this conversation and look forward to the rest of this afternoon. Over to you.
Great, thank you. And then Frederick Mugisa, are you online and can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Frederick from Act Together Uganda. It's a local NGO here in Uganda, and I'm calling from Kampala, really. Act Together is working with slum communities within Kampala, but also in secondary cities outside of Kampala. And our work has really been mainly around mobilizing community groups to participate in different processes around the city development. Currently, we're implementing a project that is aimed at supporting slum dwellers that are going to be relocated by the construction of a major highway cutting through a number of slum settlements in Kampala. And that's going to lead to displacements. But also, we are implementing a number of water and sanitation projects aimed at addressing the issue of inequitable distribution of services within the different slum settlements within Kampala, but also in other secondary cities. And we have also been in partnership with a number of university departments, especially Makerere University, through Dr. Shuaib Luasa's Makerere University Urban Action Lab, and also other universities like Uganda Christian University, where we're working with local architects to design plans for slum dweller communities. Maybe one other thing I'd like to highlight is Act Together is working with the Cities Alliance to see that many of the slum dwellers are part of the discussions that are involving city plans within Kampala. I'm happy to be part of this discussion as well. Good.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Fred.
Hi, Jen. Good to see you.
Maybe another, sorry, I'm just chiming in wherever I see a connection so that everybody is aware. Fred, very nice to see you. The work of Act Together has been profiled in a case study Shuaib Luasa led for us, and he's on the call, so he will soon introduce himself, on Kampala.
Good.
We'll talk about it a little bit.
Great, and then we have Liku, are you online?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's good afternoon in East Africa. So, my name is Liku Orgalamo, and my background is I'm an urban planner and environmental planner. And I've done studies on urban water governance, planning and institution. And I'm currently, hello, is it audible for everybody?
We hear you, Liku. I would just request everybody who is maybe not speaking, if you could please mute.
Okay.
We hear you.
Yeah. I'm currently working in the academia and also in the WRI framing paper, the building water resilience in African cities, priority production. So I'm happy to join this meeting, which helps us to get wider interlinked perspectives as to the urban challenge, and it's good to get the rich experiences from different countries and from different professional viewpoints and from different stakeholders, and I'm glad to join this meeting.
Thank you. Great. We have Mokom Jang. Are you online? Can you hear us?
Yes, Jane. Me? Sorry.
No, we're looking. Mokom, are you? Let's see. Looks like you're unmuted.
No, I'm. No, because I'm.
Sorry, not Jane. We're looking. Jane.
It's Mokom Njang. The last name is Njang.
It looks like you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you yet.
I don't. I think
we can move to the next one and come back if your audio is working. Let's see, Schweib, are you online? Schweib Loasa?
Yeah, I'm online. This is Schweib Loasa out of Makerere University, based in Kampala. Work in the Department of Geography, and we, as Fred mentioned, I'm the Urban Action Lab, where we work on a number of student-led but co-produced knowledge with communities and other stakeholders research projects on urban inequality, risk reduction, water and sanitation access. But the flagship project that we are working on is integration of informal sector into the urban economy by working with communities to establish business, using it through a business model, so enterprises to enable people get integrated into the urban economy. And I also co-authored the case study on Kampala that is part of the Towards an Eco City report. Looked at the governance and innovation around governance systems to enable inclusion of vulnerable communities and increase coverage for services and utilities within the city. Thank you. I'm pleased to be part of this.
Great, thank you. And then we have Zahir Alam.
Yes, Zahir and Guy Tansiu, we are both from a private company, a non-profit private company that works in Mauritius with, it's called Port Twist Development Initiative. Its role is to top up or supplement the work of the municipality and to coordinate all private sector projects in the capital city. So our work focuses mainly on a number of issues like the informal market to formal market, street vendors, mobility solutions, but all of this behind is more about a new mode of governance that really sort of joint venture both private sector and government to enable to harness the opportunities of the city and transform problems into opportunities. At a bigger level, at the macro level, we are very interested, Zahir, who is an urban planner, and myself on the continent as a whole. We've traveled over 30 countries of the continent and work in more than 10 of the continental countries. So, and many of the solutions we try to investigate and prepare are tested in small Mauritius, which has a scale of a lab, and it's easier to test solutions before it might be replicated or scale up in larger cities. So this is basically what we do. As a personal thing, I am the special envoy of the government of Mauritius to UN Habitat in Nairobi. So hopefully I will meet some of you in Nairobi on my next visit.
And one of our approaches that Gaita mentioned is we work on fiscal policy mechanism so that we can to encourage investment of the private sector in public agendas, so that when government looks at urban regeneration, they don't increase national debt. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. We have Bazune Gulto. Can you unmute yourself? And Bazune, can you hear us? Okay. Bazune, I just unmuted you. Can you hear us? Okay.
Yes, it's okay now.
Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to just introduce yourself quickly? Just your name, where you're joining from.
Okay, my name is Buzana. I'm currently working in World Bank country office in Addis, based in Addis, as capacity building consultant for the urban sector.
Great. Welcome. And then we have someone whose name is HP, and I don't know who's calling in from that account. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think the name appears, the name of the laptop, not mine. My name is Ababa Zaloul. I'm working currently in the Ministry of Urban Development and Construction in Ethiopia, based in Addis. I'm currently in charge of urban revenue and land reform. I'm a manager of that project. So as the name indicates, we are working across the country for urban development as well as construction sector development and regulation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think that's everyone. If I missed anyone, feel free to speak up, or if Mokom, if you'd like to introduce yourself, feel free to pipe in. Otherwise, we can just very quickly introduce the WRI staff who are on the call.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Twino Mahanji, Revocatus Twino Mahanji. You can call me Revo. I'm from Uganda. I teach at Makerere University, where I also coordinate the Center for Climate Change, but I also work with the DFID program on cities and infrastructure for growth, Uganda, where I work as climate change advisor. And basically the issues we are looking at mainly here are sustainable cities and resilient cities. And we work on energy, on infrastructure, on urban planning and development. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we'll just quickly go through the WRI staff who are online. Haile, are you online? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Haile, you might be on mute. We don't hear you. No, he's not on mute, but we don't hear him. Yeah.
Eleni, do you want to introduce yourself? We're getting some background noise from someone. Roger, should we jump to you? Or Eleni, here.
Oh, okay.
We see you now, yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, Africa. This is Eleni Shepherd, Citizen Urban Mobility Manager, placed in Addis. Thank you.
Great. Haile, do you want to jump in?
Roger, why don't we go to you?
Hello, everyone.
This is Roger van den Berg. I'm the Urban Development Director of WRI. I'm very happy to see quite some familiar faces. Before this job, I was living in Nairobi and working on cities with a couple of you on strategic urban planning, on neighborhood improvements. So you already understand where I'm coming from. I really believe that the spatial form and the layout of cities is very important and has a relevant contribution to equality in cities. I'm also very excited to work together with Wanjira on the Thriving Resilient Cities pillar. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Great. And Leo, are you still on?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I am here, yeah. Hi everyone, this is Leo Huon Patanotai. I'm the Director for Strategy and Partnerships at the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities and have been working very closely with my colleagues in Africa to develop a strategy for our work on the continent. Look forward to this discussion and hope to be meeting a lot of you soon in person.
Great, thank you. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Robin King. I work on a research team in our cities program here based in Washington. And I also look forward to meeting some of you and seeing some of you in person at some point soon.
And then I think we have Aman on from the WRI Africa office. Aman, are you?
Yeah, hi, can you hear
Great.
me?
Yes.
My name is Iman Abubakar and I work as the Urban Mobility Project Coordinator and I'm based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, but working regionally in cities on road safety, on integrated transport planning, and looking at the integration between mobility and land use planning and spatial planning. Thank you.
Great. Jillian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jillian. I work at the DC office. I'm a research analyst for this WR work.
Can I give it a shot?
Yes, Hailey, we can hear you.
Wonderful. So this is Haile. I'm the country director for WRI in Ethiopia, and great to meet all of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It looks like we just got an introduction from Mokom Njang. So she says, I don't know if everyone can see the chat on the side.
You can just read it, Maria.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yep. Hello, everyone. And sorry, my system seems to fail me. I am Mokom Njang, Strategic Planner and Partnerships Officer at the Bamenda City Council in Bamenda, Cameroon. I'm here with the Secretary General of the City Council, Mr. Mbole Payos. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Maria Hart.
Hi, Malcolm.
Sorry. I'm Maria Hart. I'm the Research and Engagement Specialist at the WRI Ross Center. And I'm helping to organize some outreach and engagement activities like this webinar and the in-person workshop that we hope to have later this year with you all. So Anjali and Wanjira and Ani, I kind of skipped over you because you quickly introduced yourself at the beginning. I don't know if you want to add anything, but otherwise we can jump into Anjali's presentation.
I just want to add, in spite of one person who couldn't hear from how fantastically the technology is working, everyone told us it's going to fail, it's not going to work. So just cross your fingers like this for the next 3 hours. So hopefully we will go through this. Anjali, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. We wanted to take some time to get these introductions. As you can see, this would have been, of course, so much easier done in person, but just getting a sense of who this group is fascinating. We have people here from the private sector, from city governments, from community organizations, those working in academia, folks representing international agencies. We couldn't have asked for a more diverse and interesting group here. So thank you again for making the time. I'm going to start to share my screen now, and this is where the crossing of fingers it will really help. Let's see if anybody needs to turn off a video while the screen is being shared, please do so. And let me just try this out. Yeah. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
You
And do
just
you
switch the display.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and keep everyone muted, just so there's limited background noise.
Okay. And you all can hear me clearly and see the screen? All right. So this is the work that we've been doing now for about 4.5 years now. We've called the project Towards a More Equal City, and I'm going to walk you through very quickly what is, as you can imagine, a body of work done over this period of time. It represents 15 research papers that have come out over this time. I'm going to just give you a very quick snapshot and summary of what we've covered. And then we'll launch into some of the discussion that Ani was saying, why we're all here together, where we need your help, where we need to kind of hear your experience so that it guides the agenda of, how do we move this research more towards action and in a way that is apt and appropriate for the African context. So moving on, these are some of the things Ani mentioned. I don't know if you can, yeah, there you go. When he gave his introduction in the beginning, this is the reason why cities are becoming so important on the global agenda. This is the reason why in 2015, the SDGs have a specific goal 11, focused on urban issues and cities. It's cities that are accounting for the majority of GDP, GHG emissions, and global population now in the world today, with dramatic national and global outcomes. This is the reason why the Paris Agreement has such a strong role highlighted for subnational actors and for cities as well in terms of reducing climate change. Also alluding back to what Ani said at the beginning, this is where we started this work. If you look at what cities need to achieve today, it's trying to achieve these 3 key objectives simultaneously. And there's tensions between them. And there's a prioritization that they're faced with. How do we prioritize jobs and economic productivity over environmental quality, livability, equity issues? How do we tackle the distributional issues resulting from economic growth? Are urbanization and economic growth actually going hand in hand as they've done for decades in the Western countries, or is that not happening today? Is that relationship actually breaking down? So there's a lot of these questions we get into this work, but the spirit of getting into some of the details here is cities are trying to achieve these 3 goals together. Every city needs to do this to be successful. And so when we were tasked with trying to, come up with a sort of state-of-the-art research and explore what are some of the issues we want to be tackling, this is where we began. This is a picture of the urbanization that's going to unfold over the next couple of decades. So just looking at urban population growth around the world between 2015 to 2030, these are projections from a database we had access to. It's called the Oxford Economics Database. Gives you city level population growth. And you can see where those big green circles are. The highest urban population growth is expected primarily in cities of the global south, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, some of Southeast Asia. We also know through some data we gathered, we were able to do this in a consistent way for about 30 cities. But if you look at the budgets per capita at the municipal level that are available to meet the needs of these growing urban populations, this is kind of the picture you have. What you have here is, Yokohama, Copenhagen, Singapore, New York, 4 wealthy cities on the right side of the x-axis, and on the left you have cities moving from the African cities to the South Asian to the Latin American to the Chinese. And the main point here really is, if you just pick any 3 cities, take Bangalore, it's highlighted here, take Guangzhou or Wuhan in China, and take New York. For the same population of about 8.5 million people, you're seeing how different by orders of magnitude different the budgets per capita are that are available to these cities to meet the needs of these populations, right? The basic urban services, infrastructure, all of that. To give you a sense, Bangalore has about 160 times lower budget per capita than New York City. Chinese cities here, Guangzhou has about 40 times lower budget per capita. And if we actually go towards the left, towards Nairobi and Lagos, you start to see budgets per capita that are really, really very low to deal with this impending challenge of population growth. I do want you to keep at the back of your minds that this was a global effort, but wherever possible, we did try to nuance the findings and the solutions for different parts of the world, different contexts that cities find themselves in. So this is one effort we did, which was, okay, recognizing there is a diversity in cities around the world. Is there a sensible way, a meaningful way that we could categorize cities? And what we said is, let's look at where cities are today, what their income level is today. That's basically our x-axis, today being 2015 when we were doing this analysis. So their income level today in terms of GDP per capita. And let's look at what I just showed you, the urban population growth and the economic growth projection. To what extent are these cities going to be, to what extent is their population growth keeping pace with their economic growth? If cities are going to have a population growth that is going to be much faster than their economic growth, they have a stagnating economy, not facing too much economic growth, yet they're low income today, we term them as struggling cities, the bottom left quadrant here. If you look at cities where the population growth is keeping up to some extent with economic growth, but they're low income today, we're calling them emerging cities, the top left. Just to give you a sense, the struggling cities here, the green and yellow circles, are again very much those sub-Saharan African, South Asian, Southeast Asian cities. Low income today and facing a challenge of urban population growth, but economies that are not necessarily keeping up. Then we also had thriving cities and stabilizing cities, which are basically high income today. And here we're seeing different trends. In some cases you have economic growth, in other cases you have shrinking economies. But we're focusing our attention in this work to primarily these struggling and emerging cities, because that is where the challenge is the greatest. And then in terms of framing, this is how we began. For those of you who've been working in this field of sustainable development, going back to the early 90s, late 80s, this was the conceptualization we had, which you see on the left side. As similar to what I was just talking about at the beginning, cities need to manage economic, social, and ecological or environmental pressures together at the same time. And many places are being able to do that. In some cases, you're seeing the economy, the environmental benefits and their economic returns being realized by cities. And there's a lot of literature and research that shows you that linkage is well understood. People do understand that economic costs represent a true, environmental costs, represents a true economic cost and a drain on the economy. And so there's been a lot of effort in the climate circles and so on to try to make that linkage clear. However, we're still seeing levels of inequality not really improving. We're seeing, in fact, poverty in cities getting worse. We're seeing more and more migration. We're seeing concentrations of the poor living in cities in informal settlements. So the social dimension of this, the equity dimension, is something the research shows us, the evidence shows us has been elusive for cities to achieve. So we said, could we think of a framing where if cities prioritize equitable access to core urban services, the way that citizens actually experience a city on a day-to-day basis, their access to jobs, the land they have access to, the housing, water and sanitation, energy, transportation, if we could achieve good quality, affordable services for all citizens in those dimensions, could that help you achieve a more economically productive and an environmentally sustainable city overall for everybody? So this was the framing, looking at equitable access to core services as your entry point to a more sustainable and successful city. With that framing, we decided to then focus in now on each of these sectors. And why these sectors, this is not going to be news to anybody listening here, but these are big global numbers. But this is the scale of the challenge, right? In housing, we have still over 1 billion people who lack affordable and secure housing. Energy poverty is a big challenge. 58% of people in low-income countries don't have access to electricity. Water, 50% don't have access. Now, keep in mind, these were global indicators we looked at before we started diving into these sectors and actually coming up with worse statistics for at the local level for specific types of cities, the struggling and emerging cities. But still, roughly speaking, at the global level, 50% of people lack access to piped water in the house that is good quality and reliable. Sanitation, 2/3 of people roughly still lack access to basic sewerage and fecal sludge management. People are spending a large proportion of their income on transportation, just commuting to meet their basic needs of jobs and other opportunities, up to 35 to 40% of their income. Informal economy, this is really important because we don't see too much research being done in this area, but 80% or so of the population, the working population in cities of the global south is informal. And here we need to keep in mind how this issue is directly linked to the services challenge. A lot of these workers are home-based workers. They live and work in informal settlements. And so the access to services and land and all of these issues we're talking about directly affects their productivity. Inland, 80%, this is a challenge that we're facing now with growing cities. Not only is the urban population growing, but you're seeing that the urban land area around the world is growing at a rate that is much faster than population growth. Some of the recent research shows that 80% of increase in urban land, global urban land area is expected just between 2018 and 2030. So we then moved into organizing this work, and this is where I'll start to get into a little bit more detail of each of the research papers we did. But how we organize it is we have the thematic papers that are sectoral, focusing in on some of these issues to answer one question: how do cities prioritize equitable access to these services while improving the environment and economy overall? And the how here is very important. There have been solutions that have been written about, but we wanted to focus in on how would you make this happen in the struggling and emerging cities. And then to not stay with the sectoral perspective, we also did city level case studies. That can we find some of those shining examples, some of those cases of cities, again, from the struggling and emerging context, from the global south, where maybe they have prioritized equitable access in one or more of these sectors and been able to see the cycle of change we're talking about, maybe over a decade, 8 to 10 years, been able to see how those interventions are leading to more, better environmental quality, better economic outcomes, better equity outcomes. We had to really search around and ask experts like, Shoaib, who's on this call, where we could focus our attention. And with that, we did, we looked across the global south. There's cities represented here that we did case studies on that are from Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, South Asia. So these were the 7 cities. In Africa, we looked at Kampala and Johannesburg. We had Surabaya in Indonesia, Guadalajara in Mexico, Porto Alegre in Brazil, Pune and Ahmedabad in India. And here the basic question being asked was, how can transformative urban change of the kind we're talking happen, and what are the enabling conditions that took hold in these cities to make these outcomes happen? So we have in detail traced the process of change in these specific cities. This is one slide on our so-called, our solutions that each of the sectoral papers came up with. There's a lot more in each paper. But let me just spend a few minutes walking you through our conclusions in each of the papers. On housing, and I want to also just reiterate, the process we went through. When we did this research, each of these papers has been done over 2 to 2.5 years at least, and it has not only been sort of looking at the state of the art and literature and the research and the evidence, but also over that 2-year period, doing consultations like this, with communities like the kind gathered here in different ways, trying to get feedback onto, what are the solutions we need to be talking about in that sector? What are some of the approaches that have worked? And so in housing, in affordable housing, the key areas we feel are most important to focus on in cities are prioritizing in situ, that is on-site informal settlement upgrading. We talked about improving rental housing and making sure rental markets, which are known to provide more affordable housing options to a large number of people, making sure cities are encouraging the development of rental markets and rental housing. making sure underutilized land within cities is being leveraged and used because it is already in a good place. It is well connected to jobs and services, making sure we're increasing that supply of affordable land to provide affordable housing. On this, I just want to mention that for a couple of these, if we have time, we're hoping that, you know, Robin and I can go into some of the details so you can see how for a particular set of sectors we actually followed this whole framing through. We might do that for housing and transport. But here I'll just give you a snapshot of the solutions in each sector. We may not get to all. On energy, looking at the evidence, the key solution areas that emerge. Again, we're trying to come up with a set of priorities for decision makers. So it's not going to be a laundry list, but the most important solutions we thought were relevant in these contexts. In energy, shifting to cleaner cooking. Is very important for the equity outcome. You see the disease burden of indoor air pollution and respiratory illness being maximum in some of the lower income households that don't have access to clean, non-solid cooking fuel. So shifting to clean cooking fuel, scaling up renewables. This whole issue I mentioned of energy poverty and the problem of basic access. This is not necessarily going to be achieved by expanding the current grid. That is one way to do it, but it needs to be supplemented through distributed renewable energy solutions, whether it is in peripheral areas. There needs to be an understanding of how different solutions might work in different parts of a city or a metropolitan area, particularly as it grows. There may be interim and medium-term solutions that work before a longer-term solution. So scaling up distributed renewables right away as the costs are falling is an important solution here. Building and appliance energy efficiency. Here again, you know, we're starting to see large proportions of people move into the middle class in so many of these cities. There's an increased consumption of electrical appliances, cooling appliances, and so on. How do we increase energy efficiency, not just in appliances, but in buildings as well? We're seeing more and more construction activity and buildings, development, infrastructure happening in so many of these cities. How do you make sure it is using low carbon materials and is energy efficient in the entire supply chain? Informal economy. Here, looking at all the evidence, you know, increasing access to public services, public space, and public procurement was our big finding. We did this paper with WeGo. Martha Chen was one of the lead authors, and she brought to us a lot of data and evidence from decades of work in working with informal workers around the world and working with the International Labour Organization. So increasing access to public services, public space, public procurement is one of the biggest challenges, which if cities resolve, you can bring large numbers of informal workers into, you know, a more productive situation, a more equitable, more equitably integrate them with the economy of the city. Reforming laws and doing it in a participatory way, where you're making sure you're addressing the needs of these informal workers. Land use. Here we talk about how, you know, there's so much development activity going on in an unplanned and unmanaged way in so many of these growing cities. You're seeing a lot of land value speculation, prices going up, pricing people out of the city, primarily for the purpose of, you know, acquiring land, those returns from the increase in land values, which don't get accrued to the public sector. It's all other actors in the city, the landowners, who basically profit from those gains. And land is such an important asset to the city that we talk about how cities need to plan better and prioritize spatial equity, target development within the city, make sure they're coming up with the zoning and land use regulations required to do that. We talk about increasing the supply of serviced land, not just within the city, but maybe adjacent to the periphery, at the periphery, while anticipating the future urban population growth that's going to take place. We talk about integrating informal settlements into the city in a way that allows these informal settlement dwellers to incrementally improve their situation, give them flexible, you know, small lot sizes, serviced lots that they can incrementally add to as their incomes and families grow over time. Transport. We talk about, you know, building complete safe streets. We use the word democratic streets here, streets for all, where every type of road user using every type of mode, whether pedestrian or non-motorized transport or informal transport, public transport is prioritized. Today, the way we're seeing things go, automobile-driven transport, two-wheelers in some of the Asian cities are dominating the streetscape. We talk about creating an ecosystem of integrated transport services. Today, we have very sort of deep deficits in public transport access in cities, public transport investment. We're seeing a lot of reliance on informal transport modes, and there is no real system where maybe you could have informal transit modes feeding into public transport and so on. You know, again, I don't want to try to encapsulate the full research in a couple of minutes, but just to say we need, we're seeing so much more of the private mobility services growing now in our cities. How do we work, how do cities create the appropriate regulation and policy framework to integrate all of these services into a way, you know, that is user-friendly and equitable? Lastly, managing private vehicle use. This is, you know, one of those disincentives that must be created for private vehicle use while creating these other alternative services that we're talking about. In water, we talk about extending piped water access around the city, addressing the issue of intermittency. Even if piped water exists, often the water in the taps is coming for 2 hours a day. It may be poor quality. How do we address the issue of intermittency and reliability? And we propose, you know, cities must extend the piped water service network. Water is a human right. It is a public good. Cities need to direct public investment. Cities and the people who finance them need to direct investment into this area. And how do you come up with mechanisms to improve affordability of water? You know, there are cities in South Africa, because of the way the country's constitution is designed, where water is considered a basic human right, and they offer a minimum threshold of basic water, daily water in certain cities. Is that a way to go? But nevertheless, we just need to come up with strategies that target a basic threshold of water delivery among low-income households who cannot afford them. Upgrading informal settlements is an important way to improve some of this basic infrastructure. Sanitation, here one of our big findings was, you know, and same for water actually, until you come up with better quality data at the local disaggregated community level on the challenges people are facing on a day-to-day level, households are facing, the time they're spending to access basic water and sanitation services, the time and you know, cost that they're spending on private treatment options for water, private treatment options for sanitation. This needs to be taken into account. So we need to first understand and diagnose the challenges that these households are facing, and you need the right data for that. Moving towards sewers in the long term. You know, there are differences of opinion on this issue, but we came out quite strongly in this research that, again, just like water, sewerage is a public good for the whole city. The absence of adequate sanitation poses a public health risk for not just households facing the lack of sanitation, but the city as a whole. And so we consider this a very important investment for cities to make. However, it is a long-term investment. We're talking about the struggling and emerging cities. So how do you come up with medium-term and short-term measures for fecal sludge management as you work towards a longer-term goal of sewerage across the city? That was a lot of information, but I'm just going to encourage you all to maybe, you know, go into each of these papers, and you know, we'll get into questions at the end. Feel free to challenge us, ask us questions about any of this. I'll just quickly keep moving to finish this piece of it. Those were the findings from the sectoral papers. Now the case studies. Here I'll go over it quite quickly. These are very, very rich stories, and this is the map of the cities we focused on. So many interesting and sometimes counterintuitive findings emerged from these case studies. I'm just going to mention here what each case study was about. And remember, I mentioned how we looked at the case studies to see how particular cities have taken on the challenge of providing equitable access to services in one or more of these areas. How did they make that happen? What were some of the enabling conditions, the financing, the national policy, the data collection that went into it? What were the enabling conditions? And that's the story we've talked about. Porto Alegre, Brazil is a very well-known global example of how participatory budgeting has been instituted in communities across the city, where at every neighborhood level, you have committees sitting together with city officials, planning the budget and the investments that need to go into their neighborhood. This whole structured mechanism that was in place for a couple of decades needed national level financing and policy support. We talk about that story. But it's not something other places have been able to achieve. What are some of the reasons? And in fact, even in Porto Alegre, sad truth is, as we were writing this case study, the participatory budget process was suspended, change of government after 2 decades. So, how these outcomes and these interventions can be fragile based on some of these challenges of changing government. And this is some of the stuff we write about. Pune, very interesting story of how waste pickers in the city who were part of the informal sector, very stigmatized, became part of the city's waste management system to ultimately reach a situation where cities gave them contracts to recycle waste and gather waste door to door and made them part of the formal system. There's also the transportation story there of how the city tried to prioritize bus rapid transit. And here, I think the big finding was how civil society groups, technical expertise, solid technical expertise, really informed the municipal government at every stage. Ahmedabad, it's the story of how the city is being able to structure its land development in a way that it's being able to prioritize affordable housing and inclusive development within the city, not way out in the periphery. So how it is doing those targeted investments within the city through its town planning scheme. Kampala, story of how the city and the national agency prioritized pro-poor access to fecal sludge management. There was an actual unit set up within the National Water and Sanitation Agency, and how the collaboration between the national agency and the local agency worked very well to make sure, along with community organizations like Act Together, Fred and Shoaib can talk about the story much better than me, how together they were able to achieve better access, far better access in Kampala to fecal sludge management at the low income household level. Johannesburg is a story of how the city is still struggling with these entrenched spatial inequities. You do not have access to jobs, good quality access to jobs through transportation in some of the historically black neighborhoods. But through the Corridors of Freedom bus rapid transit project, the city tried to come up with this very integrated land use transportation approach. And Roger can probably talk about the story much better than me, but it's a beautiful story of alignment, policy alignment from the national level to the provincial level, where they created the spatial development framework, to the local level, incentives created for private developers and others to invest in affordable housing along the public transit corridors to make that vision come to reality. But again, they're still trying to make that happen. They're still watching this case. So I'm talking about these cases not so much as pure best practices, but as a lot of rich lessons in some of the hard enabling conditions that need to be together to make these interventions happen. Guadalajara quickly is a story of how public space was made car-free and accessible to wider residents of the city, the broader population groups, and ultimately the civil society groups that made this happen became part of government. And so their agenda of prioritizing public space became part of the agenda of the city. Very interesting story there. Surabaya, I think this is a very well-known example. Kampungs, traditional informal settlements and the neighborhoods and the upgrading of these kampungs, again, supported very interesting framework of enabling conditions coming together, not just donor support from agencies like the World Bank financing it, but national government support and local government working in close partnership with communities to go into settlements and upgrade them in an integrated, providing all sorts of services in a very participatory way. Quickly, just to go, that was the sectoral papers, the case studies. Each of them is a whole paper. Please, I encourage everybody to look at it at leisure. But just want to highlight some of the new data. This may be interesting to a lot of you that we generated through this 4 years of work on these different papers. Things like this I've already shown. We looked at, budgets per capita across 30 cities and some stark gaps you see in some of global South cities and the struggling emerging context. we looked at, for the first time, data on upward and outward growth of cities. This was part of our urban expansion paper. Just to track, what is the scale of risk we're seeing with respect to resilience as well. A lot of these growing cities are expanding into agricultural zones, into wetlands, into farmland. How are we going to manage that whole sort of growth, and how are we going to plan that land development in a more sustainable way? Interesting patterns here about how East Asian cities are primarily where you're seeing some of the highest upward growth happening. Although cities have both kinds of growth in them, we need to make the point here about how upward growth, which is the more spatially efficient, resource efficient growth, actually has happened only in cases where financial investment goes into it, and places where real estate markets and financial markets are more mature. So how do we again start to create the enabling conditions for this more efficient form of urban growth? We gathered, with the help of several people, again, Shuaib and others on this call, data for the first time, very local level data on the water and sanitation, the quality and quantity of water and sanitation access in 15 cities. We were only able to do this for 15 cities. This is where we started to see the challenge of how low-income households are spending so much on these more informal solutions, informal service providers like water tanker providers, people providing bottled and sachet water. How much of the income of poor households is actually going into this type of service provision, and the city is not able to provide the right services? In the transport paper, we looked at accessibility to jobs, and how it's not just your transport mode that we need to talk about when we're talking about addressing transportation challenges. We need to consider location within the city. This is just an example of the analysis of Johannesburg. The portion on the left is technical. It'll take some time to quickly explain, but we wanted to come up with a sense of who is underserved by the transportation system of the city, based on not only the modes you have access to and the affordability of those modes, but your location in the city. Very important, because the public transport doesn't reach everywhere. And so we came up with these categories of, bottom left, we have the stranded underserved, who simply have to walk or they have no other modes accessible to them. The mobile underserved, where you may rely on two-wheelers, on informal transport, you may be commuting 2 to 3 hours every day. You're spending a high amount of your time and money on accessing transportation. And then towards the right side, you have those households that have much more access, but they have it through private vehicles and spending money or being well located in the city. So there's a little bit of this analysis that we did, and what you see it just placed out on a map is the stranded underserved and the mobile underserved. The underserved populations, underserved in terms of transportation access, are the ones in those orange colors, on the periphery of the city. Just talking about now, just zooming out a little bit, back to the framing of this work and where we were when we began. Over this period, we have tried to have these kind of discussions in all of these forums as this role of cities has expanded on the global agenda and attention to cities in the SDGs, Paris Agreement, Habitat Tree Conference created the new urban agenda. We have kind of been moving along with this research in this context. We recently were at the WUF World Urban Forum Conference in Abu Dhabi, presenting this work. Again, just getting feedback on the framing and the approach. And where we are now is here, trying to synthesize all of this that I've talked about, the learnings from the sectoral papers, the learnings from the case studies. How does it all add up in a city to fulfill that framing? How are those enabling conditions, those planning and finance and data and governance coming together? That's where we are. And we would love your feedback and input. There are some emerging themes, as you can imagine, common themes emerging through the whole body of work about how there is really a need for strategic urban planning, cross-sectoral spatial planning, integrated planning at the city scale. city and city region scale. I want to also just highlight that before this workshop and that we were going to do in Ethiopia, we did a workshop in India as well in December and sought the same kind of feedback. And so some of the findings here are now informed not only by the research, but also some of the feedback we heard in India. Strategic urban planning, the need for data at, again, the disaggregated local scale. You need the data for a few things, not just to diagnose the challenges. You need it to democratize decision making. You need it for the participation of these communities, working with cities to identify challenges and solve them. On finance, we need capital investment in improving service delivery. The focus on where the underserved communities are. We need to make sure that finance is going into ensuring mechanisms for affordability. By that, I mean things like subsidies. If subsidies have to be targeted at particular vulnerable population groups, we need to make sure that's happening. Integrating the formal and informal. This is a very important theme because informal land development and housing, informal services, the informal workers. You've seen me mention this theme so many times. This remains a reality of our struggling and emerging cities. How do you integrate the formal and informal, and what is needed to do that? How do you integrate formal and informal service providers, formal and informal housing? First of all, do these labels even matter? Do they even mean anything? We need to kind of address some of these issues. If we are to integrate what is today called the formal and the informal, what is the appropriate regulation to do this? And how do you allow that? Because you can achieve better access to services for all citizens if you kind of leverage that that sort of integration of formal and informal. You need the informal service providers as part of your system. Otherwise, you're missing large groups of people who actually rely on their services. Urban land management, every issue, the sectoral topic that I talked about here, has a linkage with how land is managed. The centrality of land to delivering services. Managing land so that you achieve the right densities. Using land to add to municipal finance. Remember the point I made about how today the increase in land values is not being captured by the public sector, by the city. It is being captured by private landowners, private developers, real estate sector. How do we make sure land actually becomes a source of increasing source of municipal finance in cities? Land management is an important theme. Political commitment. In many of our case studies, we saw that when there was a political commitment to achieving pro-poor outcomes, to the equity agenda, the political commitment married together with local level and civil society coalitions, civil society and community groups working with political leaders, that is where we've seen the greatest success. So we need to have these coalitions come together towards a shared vision that prioritizes equity. That was one of the lessons from the case studies. With that, I spoke a lot. I'm going to be very silent from now on. Just to put this question before you to start the discussion. First, any reactions, of course, from you all to everything we've talked about. And then this is the question I want to leave you with. Does this framing resonate with you? This framing of starting with equitable access to services as an entry point. You have experience and evidence from your own work that this is the way to go. And if you could share examples from your cities, from your work that support this, that challenge this, that would be really helpful to us as we write about this. So with that, I'll open it up. And Maria, what would be the best way to moderate the discussion? I know you're watching the chat box, so people can always write in the chat box if they would like to go next, or I would say at least at the beginning, please feel free to just raise your hand on video and start timing in. Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, so I think if anyone has immediate reactions or comments, feel free to just chime in. And then if we have a lot of, or if we have people talking over each other or anything, we can, you can just type in the chat box that you have a comment, and then we'll kind of go through them that way. But feel free for anyone to just speak up.
Maria, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and Ani and the team, Ani, Robin, Jillian, please feel free to add any thoughts you might want to.
We were, Anjali, thank you very much. We will add. I think we are not all used to, in a webinar setup, how to get started. So as Maria said, whoever wants to speak up, just unmute and speak, and then we'll get going. Otherwise, we would have to call on each one of you. That would be kind of awkward.
Shoaib, it looks like you're raising your hand. So if you want to go ahead and comment.
Yes, raise my hand. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much, Anjali, for walking us through the entire report, the framing papers, and even the case study papers. Very useful information. I really like the summary. But I just want to make a few very quick comments that the synthesis you make at the end is very useful. But I think for all of us who are on this call and others who are really city change makers, we really need to dive deep into the details. The nuances are very, very important. For example, in as much as I agree on the synthesized comments about strategic planning and land management for transformative urban change, I think it is not seamless to just create new systems of land management, for example, improvement of tenure and ownership on that, because that does not actually register progress and change at a city scale, at a scale that you would really like this change to be. And that is simply because there are three things that are very important, which are also partly nuanced in the many city case studies, and that is in terms of infrastructure and services. It has to do with coverage of the infrastructure and services, and therefore that matters which types or mix. It has to do with access of those services and utilities, and it also has to do with affordability. When you dive into those three issues, you will see inequalities across cities within each city, and that will always impede the seamless connection that we think that when you have better land management and strategic planning, it will be seamless. Whereas I do not really say that it's not bad. I think that there has to be a mix with a different approach that really tackles where the problem is, and that is inequality, and that requires new ways of doing things. If it is going to be large-scale infrastructure, yes, I agree that large infrastructure is still useful, but it will not actually be up to speed to increase coverage and access in a way that it's affordable, given the speed of urbanization in the global south, in the struggling cities as you categorize them. The second comment I want to make is in regards to integration of the informal. Again, when you dive deep into informal, it is not seamless that once you have the informal integrated with public services provided to informal, it will be seamless that people get better jobs and enhance their incomes and improve livability and well-being. You have to dive deep into the different innovative ways that sometimes, if not always, will be disruptive and unconventional to many formal processes of planning and city management that will actually accelerate. Because at this point in time, I think we should also start talking about accelerating transformative urban change. And to do that, you need a different approach to informality. And rather than maybe only talking about integrating the informal into the formal, we need also to actually embrace the informal, which means working with the informal and leveraging the opportunities that are within the informal. And again, my third very quick comment is about data. Disaggregated data, wonderful. It gives us an understanding of the inequalities and the challenges that many people across city scale are facing. But again, it is not seamless that data leads to better decisions. I think data needs to be, especially now that this report is, in my understanding, in trying to enable the move from what we know to what actions need to be taken for urban change. it is important that any subsequent data collection within that kind of space of enabling change and taking action has to be data that is purposeful and data that for solving problems rather than decision making. And my reasoning for that is that the decision making frameworks are still very much stuck into the governance and decision making regimes that are very impeding in terms of innovation and change. Those are the comments I wanted to make. Otherwise, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Anjali.
Anjali, it's Guy Tansiu speaking. I will.
Please go ahead.
Like to have 5 minutes because I will have to leave you, unfortunately. I would like to speak on two issues, which are the first two issues, I think, of your paper and questions. One is the land ownership issue. In many countries of Africa, you know, you take a city like Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, almost 92% of the land, the government doesn't even know who owns the land. There is no data, no cadastre, and it comes to a lot of litigation and a lot of discussion between various people, property owners, government, institution, and even private. And the notion of ownership itself in many of these countries is very different from the Western way. Sometimes they don't even consider it to be to necessarily be a part of their ownership that they will give as a legacy or inheritance to their heirs. It's just a land that they may use freely at any time, just because their cattle will graze on it, or they will cross the piece of land to go to fish on the coast, or this sort of attitude. So these are elements which are quite unconventional to Western world, which has to be integrated in whatever strategic planning and urban land management we would like to do in countries like that. The second thing is what I would like to say, which is both a disadvantage and an asset, is the use of IT and the digital services. You know, one of the basic, in your slides, it was very, very well expressed that we want to deliver basic services to the population so that they have better access to education, health, or services like this. The traditional approach in most Western world and how it has been done is first you build the infrastructure, then this infrastructure is the delivery route for these services to the people. But it is happening differently in Africa already, irrespective of government policies or even private sector policies. When you look at any African cities, you see them almost like chaotic, no geometrical connection. It looks like anything goes in any direction, and yet it's full of energy and people are communicating, they are doing business, they are delivering services, they are buying things, they are proposing services, etc. How are they connected? They are connected today by the smartphone, most of them. The M-Pesa in Kenya is a very good example of the invention of this kind of service and connection with people, which connect the informal to the formal in a way that was sort of unsuspected before. And it's a sort of leapfrog innovation which we need to think upon in Africa. In Kigali, in Rwanda, they have delivered drugs and medicine to very remote places without building the road and the health services. They are dispensing health advice to the population without moving the population, without connecting with them physically. All these are being processed. M-Pesa, I forgot to mention, by the way, like 80% of the population don't even have a bank account, and yet they are trading. And this way of trading finally brings them into very naturally to the formal world. And because of their connection, you can track them. You do government or track them in Delhi or in Bombay. I think they have used to register the street hawkers so that now they can really be part of the formal market and even be registered with a license and everything. So this sort of IT connection is like a virtual infrastructure connecting the whole of the population to deliver services in a totally different way from the Western world. These are elements which are very innovative we need to look at and in our approach to the African continent, which is quite different from many other places. So these to stop here, I would like to say these are the two issues: land ownership and data, and also the use of informatics and new apps to deliver a number of city services to the citizens, which was totally unable before. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank you. Unfortunately, I can't stay longer to participate more. I think it's a great initiative, and thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Annie, for everything. And I will say goodbye to you and hope to see you later. I will exchange by mail and send you some more data we are doing here so that you are also aware of what we in our small country we are trying to do in a positive way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. And if you're
Thank you so much.
we're happy to contribute. So keep us in the loop.
We definitely will. Thank you so much. Excellent comments, Kaitan. Look forward to connecting with you again.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye. And I just wanted to very quickly comment. Thank you, Shoaib, for that feedback. I think one of the things we are completely on the same page on, and we're trying to write about this with the right examples, is this idea of how do you embrace the informal economy. As I may have used terminology integrating formal and informal, but really you're absolutely right. This is where we want to make the case of how do you embrace the informal, recognizing that this is the reality. They're actually providing, whether in transport or any of these other services sectors, an important service to the city. There's informal settlements that are to be considered part of the city, to be integrated. How do you embrace the informal? And I think, one of my slides later, if I do get to the transportation paper, will show how cities have really struggled with this question. And to that extent, any good examples, several of you, Jane and others, Fred, you work with organizations like that. I would love to hear from you, Jane, for example, about the Mukuru example. How you are embracing the informal there in a way that you're harnessing their energy, the knowledge of the informal settlement dwellers, and improving conditions. It's not just the city coming in and imposing a solution. Oh, I think, Jane, you're trying to speak. You just have to unmute.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think what we have done in Mukuru is we read the law and we found out that there is a provision in our Physical Planning Act that stipulates that county governments or municipalities can declare an area with special development challenges and opportunities as a special planning area. And that basically means that the county has the power to stop any further developments in that area for a period of 2 years until it develops plans for the redevelopment of that area. So we persuaded the county government of Nairobi to declare Mukuru as a special planning area, and we started the process of planning. So Mukuru has quite unique development challenges, which we had conducted research early and were able to establish. Some of them were the land issue, because Mukuru sits on about 680 acres of land, and it is all private land. So from our research, because, and I think this is true of most cities, that most cities do not give freehold titles. And they normally would give leaseholds to landowners. So we discovered that Mukuru had leasehold titles that were allocated by the state, and that the leasehold titles had special conditions of grants that provided that the landowners should develop the land within a stipulated period of time, which they failed to do. And that's why we had this huge population of about 100,000 families living on this land. So under the conditions of grants, the city or the government had the power to recall the titles, to cancel those titles for breach if they failed to develop as stipulated in the title. So that is basically what we have proposed, that the city should take back and redevelop this land for the urban poor. We also, so that was one of the big problems. So the problems are in all the areas that you have identified. And what we did, because we also realized we did not have the resources to do this plan within the time stipulated, was to approach different organizations, civil society organizations, churches, universities, both local and international, and create 8 planning consortia. And these 8 planning consortia were to develop sectoral plans in 8 areas. And these areas were basically in the areas of land, how to deal with the land challenge that was facing Mukuru, that was the most fundamental, water, sanitation, and energy, education, because Mukuru doesn't have a single public school, despite the fact that it's the poorest part of the city, because the state cannot build schools on private land. So education, public health and health services, infrastructure, commerce, and infrastructure and commerce, and housing is another area. So they're basically 8 sectoral areas. So each of these sectoral areas is headed by the county departments and supported by organizations that are not county, non-state organizations. And each is supposed to develop a plan, which is then integrated into one Mukuru-wide plan that covers each of those sectors. So right now we're about to finish planning. And God willing, we should have completed the planning process by this year in August. So that is where we are. I don't know whether it's very clear.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Which is, in terms of these sectoral plans and the way that you're bringing them together, how are the trade-offs and priorities of the different sectors being addressed?
Okay, like for instance, one of the things we decided to do was not to push the housing agenda, because as a first item, because we realized first that in Nairobi we have very high tenancy rates. We have about 90%, between 80 and 90% of the residents of informal settlements are tenants. So we realized that we were going to have a big fight on our hands if we went for the housing, because it would mean taking away a source of income for a small group of people who make a living out of building shacks without toilets and letting them out to the poor. So, and then we also realized it was not a battle we was fighting at that moment, because we didn't even have the land. So we prioritized water sanitation because of the public health issues. So this area has very poor water because it has a high water table. That means people are not able to dig pit latrines very well. So there's a lot of, it's not a very nice place to live. So we prioritized water sanitation and drainage as priorities. And then obviously for the water and sanitation to work, we also need to open the roads. So we have planned for the road network. And so basically we're starting with the infrastructure and then moving on to land and housing as a second item. The infrastructure and education services.
And is this being financed by the city and sort of with assistance from the national government, or is the private sector involved? Sort of how is it getting paid for?
With the planning process, right now the planning process is kind of like a civil society process. So we brought together 41 organizations, and because at the time when we persuaded the city to declare Mukuru as a special planning area, we didn't have a budget line. So we just walked and asked people with expertise in education, would go to Concern because they've been doing education in the slums forever, and asked them, please, could you come in and bring your expertise? And that is the way we've done it. So everybody has brought in their expertise and whatever funds that they have. So we've planned on a shoestring budget and managed to do this. So we don't have a budget line. We don't have a budget. It's the contributions of people who live in and work within the city who brought their expertise.
And then in terms of moving from planning to implementation, is the idea that hopefully these plans will inform the city's sort of budget allocation process or national allocation?
Yes, because one of the conditions for budgeting is that you cannot allocate a budget unless you have a plan. So the planning is prerequisite. It's a prerequisite to budgeting. So the fact that we've gone through the county planning process, but this is a county plan, means then that the county can allocate budget lines, and it has allocated certain budget lines along the way. So we're hoping that once the plan is ready, then also the different ministries can take up different elements of the plan. So if it is the education ministry can take up education, health can take up health.
We're hearing some background noise. I don't know, Maria, can you make out where? Yeah.
It's the construction site.
Oh, it's yours. No worries.
Yeah,
but this example, we just heard a lot about it from Jack. Was at the World Urban Forum, and it's just a fascinating story. I mean, I think we could write a whole case study on this. Really glad that you can share this experience. I'm going to also just open it up to others here. Excuse me, for the still staying at the high level, feedback to the presentation I made. Chris, you were typing something. Would you just like to speak? If you can.
Can I say something?
Yeah. Yes, we hear. Sorry, who's that?
This is Revo from Uganda.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this good study, which throws very important lights, and for the presentation. I'm looking at the strategies for a more equitable city that you presented, and specifically on energy, and I want to use an example of what is happening in Uganda and in Kampala. The issue is that when you're talking about shifting to cleaner cooking and scaling up renewables, you really mentioned that one of the issues that the current approach of using electricity from grids may not solve the problem for urban poor, which I think is quite revealing, but there are quite a number of intricacies there. For example, a lot of investment is already done in increasing grid electricity, and the concentration of the distribution channels are in the urban areas. Like, for example, in Uganda now, electricity generation has been increased to about 2,000 megawatts, but the current consumption is 600 megawatts, implying that you have a lot of electricity that is generated but is not being consumed. So, and really one of the bigger issues, and yet many of the urban population either do not access electricity, so that is the issue of connectivity, but also even when they access it, they don't use it for cooking because of the high tariffs. So the issue of affordability is a very big problem, even when there is access to that electricity. But even then, when you go into scaling up renewables for cooking and whatever, again, the high investment, the high cost of these renewable technologies is a big issue. Say, for example, if you are going to use LPG or biogas or whatever it is, and even then, so I think there is a need for a mix of these issues. It's depending on what is a challenge in a particular locality. So the issue of energy there. Secondly, one of the issues that now threatens an eco-city is the issue of climate resilience and disaster risk. And this cuts across most of these strategies for a more eco-city. So whether we are talking about energy, whether we are talking about land use, like for example, most of the urban poor in, say, a city like Kampala, they are inhabiting high-risk areas, the lowlands, which are highly vulnerable to issues of flooding. And many of these are reclaimed areas. So the issue of also dealing with ecosystems, of course, it is an issue of also land use planning. It cuts across, should be also taken into consideration. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, really, really helpful comments. You know, one of the things we should get into, if people can share good examples, as you talked about how, you know, scaling up distributed renewable technologies, all of that needs financing. The places where it is happening now, it's happening with subsidies so that they can be affordable for the particular groups that can't afford them. But we're not seeing any kind of scale being achieved here. So I think at some point, as we talk about all of these different solutions across the sectors, one of the discussions I'd love to get into, if people on this call have some experiences, what are some of those financing mechanisms that allow these solutions to become more affordable for the groups we're talking about? And absolutely well taken your point about how this lack of access, Shoaib made a similar point, results from a mix of factors. It's not just the connectivity, it is the affordability, it's the coverage in the city. It's all of these contributing to the lack of access, and we need to identify where is exactly the gap happening. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Chris, sorry, you were trying to speak earlier.
Thank you, Anjali. But I'm not going to talk about financing. So do you want to talk about financing first?
That's fine. That was a question, you know, just to have open here for the group. It's something we would like to be able to write more concretely about. So if there's good evidence and examples from the African context, great to hear about it.
Okay, so I'm referring to water supply and sanitation, and I feel you're missing a tremendous opportunity, and things have moved a long way since when we first met one another and when we had that first workshop in DC. So the nexus thinking is really taken root, and I think that's very important. Water, energy, food. There are other. So it's not water, energy, water, energy, food, as I've typed there. Sorry about that. Water, energy, food. And there are other nexuses, but it's that integrated view on planning. And then there's the circular nutrient economy, or the circular economies, just generally circular economies. And two particular ones are obviously people are very aware of the circular economy on water, that it goes around and goes up and comes down in rain, and so on. That's well known. But the circular nutrient economy is premised on the fact that we don't accumulate nutrients in our body. We excrete what we ingest. So in principle, then one is able to sustain oneself on the nutrients you excrete. So the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, and the other trace minerals that are necessary for agriculture, you excrete. And so if you could capture those nutrients, you wouldn't have this great need, and we're talking now the countries in Central Africa, which are far from the sea, the great difficulty of getting nutrients, high cost of fertilizer. That's one of the reasons for inward migration to the cities, is that the farmers are actually mining the nutrients out of the soil of where they're living, and the soil is getting worse and worse year by year. Not only nutrients, but you've also got the humic material, the organic material in the soil, captured carbon. So we've got to rethink how the waste within cities can be sent back to rural areas, or not just one big loop, but there are lots of tiny loops all the way moving forwards and backwards. So very much like a food web that we see with lots of different cycles along the way. So getting to the sanitation part of all of that is that we've got most of the nutrients report to the urine. Most of the pathogens, or virtually all the pathogens, report to the feces. Separate the two. You've now got two streams which you can treat within very different ways, and you've removed problems of eutrophication and of water resources if you've removed the urine. And the urine then has the opportunity for reuse. It's early days in that. Urine separating toilets that are invisible to the user are now coming on them. They have now been designed. At the moment, they're hitting the market at the top end, $1,000, €1,000 a pedestal. But that's good, because they're out of the reach of the likes of you and me, never mind poor people. But that is good, because it's no longer a product that is seen as being designed for the poor and is strange. It's an aspirational product that you and I can't afford, and it will come out in a form which is down to $25 a pedestal very soon. And then that becomes an accessible thing. But in the meantime, you've seen the pictures of this pedestal on the front pages of Vogue and all of those high fashion type magazines. So it overcomes that concern that the technology is, well, it's all right for poor people, but you aren't using it yourself. And so we've got a whole lot of different things happening there. With the urine separating toilet at a very low water consumption, instead of using 35 liters of water per day per person, if you were to use new water to flush it every time, you can get away with 3.5 liters for exactly the same service. So we're talking about a factor 10 reduction in intensity of water consumption. So all your water resources that you bring into the city can be much less. You don't go for large water networks. You start looking at decentralization. You start using local water resources. You build your networks at the rate at which you have users. In the same way, we can say that cellular networks are cellular by name. They're built cell by cell wherever people are. You don't build cells where people aren't. You don't have a 10-year wait before you actually reach the capacity. You put your cell in and it's literally put in at capacity. Do the same thing with non-networked sanitation water systems. So I think we're missing out on a lot there.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, thank you for that. Go ahead.
I'll give you some written input in there. I think it's much better than just talking.
No, thank you for that push. I just want to mention, and this is where I would love for us to also just get into a dialogue here. You're here, Shoaib is here. Our work on sanitation was funded by the Gates Foundation, and we got into several discussions with them over 2 years about this approach, right? The reinventing the toilet approach that obviously you've been talking about, that they're funding, and the position we're kind of taking in this paper that was, entirely sort of again reviewed and supported by them, of how we need to invest in these public sewerage systems in cities. That investment is just so far lacking right now, that and the technology of the reinventing the toilet not yet being affordable. Talk about the urgency of acting now. Look at a horizon of the next 3 years. What needs to happen? That's where we came up with this position. I would just could you talk to us a little bit about what is the uptake of these ideas among cities struggling with the sanitation challenge across Africa? Some of these very important ideas in terms of technology and recycling of the materials and reuse and making it resource efficient, but the cost and the scale not matching the need that exists right now across African cities at least.
Thank you. Okay, I think the reality is that if you want a sewer, you've got to have a lot of water, because the sewer works by having a lot of water. And there are many places where water is scarce. And there's examples of Harare and Bulawayo, for example, in Zimbabwe, where there's water shortages within the city, and where they had a lot of water, they don't now. And the sewers have actually just blocked up. People have used them, but they haven't had the amount of water necessary to transport the material, and so they're blocked. And then you've got a real mess on your hands. So your water supply and your sanitation must be in harmony. Similarly, if you supply large quantities of water to an area, you have to have a drainage system to take it away. So you can have a public health problem because you've supplied too much water. You can have a public health problem because you haven't supplied enough water. So there is that sweet spot in the middle where the two are in harmony. And so we've got the potential of container-based sanitation, which is in fact what a lot of systems have. In fact, where it's just, you want to move away from open defecation into some sort of managed system. We see in areas like some areas of Dar es Salaam, for example, where a large proportion, probably the majority of the population, they do not have sewage sanitation, and they have their own self-made toiletries, and that is not necessarily a well-managed system, because that's the fecal sludge problem, as we said.
Okay. I just want to point out, I think Fred Mugisa, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead. And again, we're seeking, as much as we do want to discuss your thoughts on all of these issues, we also want your sense of the framing here. Providing equitable access to all of these services as a starting point, being the sort of entry point to a more sustainable city. Please do keep that question in mind as well. Thank you. So we'll have Fred, and then we'll go to Roger.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the presentation, Anjali. I want to just give a bit of what we've been doing in Kampala around sanitation work. We, as a city, we are grappling with the issue of inequitable access to sanitation services, and we understood, especially working in informal settlements, that it is difficult to have everyone connected to the grid, the water grid, and even to the sewer grid. Okay, having that in mind, we realized and noticed that there were already ingenious activity by local communities in the different settlements. And given the fact that close to 70% of residents in Kampala live in slum areas, there were already some local solutions, or what are called solutions, to address the sanitation challenge. So while many have also been having pit latrines, okay, as a solution which is really unsustainable, the city has already come in place to discourage this kind of use. But then already we can see that in some communities, the use of what you would call affordable sanitation solutions. For example, we've seen communities where they're using biofuel toilets, where they use worms, I think tiger worms, to be able to digest the waste, okay, and then this is later on used as manure in the gardens that they have around their settlements. And such solutions we have seen contribute to a reduction in the cost that different households and families have to spend on dealing with the cost of using sanitation services. Also, we have also seen that instead of each family having to pay for the sewer emptier, we've seen cases where different families come together and contribute a single cost. So that when there's a trip by the emptying company, it doesn't make one trip to an individual family, but the cost is for each of the. So when a trip is made, it's covering multiple families, and the cost is reduced rather than where each family in the community contributing. So we can see, like, in many different solutions available, but these solutions are only able to come in place with the understanding that not all of us, or not everyone in the city, can be able to get connection to the sewer system, the grid or the centralized system, okay? But then also to get the government or the city authority acknowledge that there are multiple ways in which sanitation services can actually be provided. One other thing is to also utilize the use of communal public toilets, even though these have come up with have come with security challenges, because they are only accessible during the day, especially for the young women and older women, because there are usually some security risks involved when women go to these facilities in the night. But you can see that they have greatly addressed the lack of sanitation challenges. And from the data that we collected at the end of 2018, we realized that there's been a reduction by 20%, by 45% from 2014 to 2018. There was a reduction of 45% in cases of open defecation and use of flying toilets. And part of the reason for this has been that there are now solutions available, or options available, among the poor to address their sanitation needs. And I think that the opportunity also lies in, instead of government investing lots of money in the centralized system, there could be ways to acknowledge, first of all, the existing solutions that are coming in from the communities, and then direct investments in those areas. Because we have also seen that there's an improvement in the local economy for companies and individuals that are providing these services. So I think that's something that I wanted to highlight based on the work that we're doing here in Kampala. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. No, that's a very important point, and it is something, you framed it so well, and that's one of the ways we're trying to write about it as well, that recognize that some of these informal solutions can serve the short and medium term needs. So even as the city begins to invest in the centralized systems, the short and medium term need is going to be met by these community solutions, and recognizing them, supporting them, directing investment to them is very important. We've drawn some interesting examples, from your work and in Kampala as you were writing about this. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Rogier. Rogier, go ahead.
Yeah, I have 2 points well, I have many points to make. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. It's very exciting. Of course, I'm much more read into it than maybe others in the call, but I want to make two points, and that is especially on the matter of integration and urban planning. You mentioned urban planning as an important tool to overcome kind of sticky issues in these thematic focus areas. And to stick to the question of access to urban services, I mean, the access to urban services can really benefit from an integrated approach. I mean, how do you provide solutions for transport and land use? How do you combine water and housing, informal economy, energy, and so on? So, and the role of planning planning has a crucial role to find these integrated solutions through a spatial approach. It is still very difficult to position urban planning as a strong tool within everywhere in the world. Anyway, let's put it like that. But especially, it is very difficult to position urban planning in local authorities, and also shift planning from a very kind of urban management focused approach or focused tool into a more strategic tool that can prioritize action and finance, something that is proactive, that can move ahead, that find these solutions and puts these solutions on a timeline for decision makers to not only take action, but also to understand what necessarily which kind of sticky issues need to be undone in order to find that integration. Everybody here in the call knows how difficult it is to only bring two sectors together in a solution. So that is one point I want to make. The second point is the access to services is around form, about spatial form. So the access to services that includes the access to public space. I think you mentioned that under the column of informal communities, but public space is of course a very broad, relevant, or maybe the key relevant topic, in my opinion, on how cities are shaped. And I think I want to take away a misunderstanding about public space. In my opinion, let's say public space is everything that is not private space. And then, so it is not only that nice square or that little park, it is everything, every space in the city that is accessible for all. And this access to public space for all is very relevant. And you see the way that rapid growing cities are currently being formed is with a lack of this kind of permeable pattern that is so relevant for having also access to the other services. So, and here again, kind of and if you take into consideration that the production of the city, making the city, the production of the city, and especially in countries where cities are rapidly growing, that production is mainly in hands of the private sector. It is not the public sector rolling out these infrastructure. Ideally, you maybe would expect that, but it is not happening. So if you don't find a way to have a strong set of regulations imposed on private developments, you will never enter into a situation where you have a permeable city with access to public space for all. So this is a very, 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 very sticky issue that I want to raise.
Thank you, Rogier. Very important also because, I mean, your push to talk about public spaces, everything that's not private. Streets are like the biggest example of that. And one of the things, we try to write about is this concept of permeability you're talking about. How streets not only provide access and provide that permeability, streets act as a conduit for the services, all of these services. So again, it is a public space that in the truest way, needs to be considered and planned through local agency plans and so on. But what doesn't happen is that the urban services that go along with the street are not often planned by the agencies that control transport and street infrastructure. I wanted to raise here, just because you talked about it, and a few people, Gaitan brought it up, Shoaib also brought it up, I think this issue of land ownership. You know, one of the things, and again, I'm hoping people will just chime in on broader feedback on the paper. I'm just picking up on Roger's point and this issue of land ownership being so mixed and unknown across African cities. Not only is it mixed with customized and tribal ownership and so on, but he mentioned 92% of the land in Abidjan, it's not even known who owns it. In a context like this, how do we, and Roger, maybe you can share some of your experience working in African cities, where do you begin with the planning exercise? Yeah, just talk about that a little bit. You know, we're trying to write about the sequencing as well. Yeah,
I think maybe if I may that free to I think if Kofi is still on the line, Kofi above, because if you're talking about where do you start, working with the communities and the landowners in a context where land ownership is unknown, it is very relevant. And I don't know, Kofi, if you are there, but maybe you can share some of the experiences that we had in the working on the extension of Accra and Ningo Pram Pram.
Kofi, would you like to speak? Your mic is on mute.
If not, I can just briefly address this for Kofi, maybe to come in later.
Sure, go ahead.
No. So in this context of very limited understanding and very limited records of land ownership, it is even the planning as a process becomes ever more relevant. So not planning as a blueprint, but planning as a process becomes ever more relevant, because you need to build trust among landowners around a future vision and a plan. And I have to say, in for example, the case of Ningo Pram Pram, which is a large extension in the outside Accra, the interest of landowners in a structure, in a very basic but structured plan, is of course very high, because a plan means better access to the services that you have spelled out, and a plan also means that a lot of the unknowns and uncertainties about the future and their land are being taken away. So it creates a lot of value, and I don't only mean value in terms of a monetary value, but also value in understanding what are options for landowners and their families to move ahead towards a prosperous, more prosperous future, but also to take away a lot of uncertainties on what's actually going to happen. So that plan is important, and as I said, that process in which that plan is going to take shape is very important. So you have to bring, let's say, the landowners together, and sometimes extended families, sometimes in the different tribes that have an understanding of who owns the land, and from there you can really create a lot of momentum. So let's say a plan that is not supported by the non-recorded landowners is a plan that will probably never work. So, and this is another sticky issue. That means that these processes are cumbersome, of course. Well, not cumbersome, but they're long-term, very high intensity processes with a lot of partners involved.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger. Kofi, would you like to add? I would also just say, I don't know if Edlam is still on the call.
She had to step off.
She had to leave. Okay.
At 9, yeah.
But Bizune or Eleni, you know, those from Ethiopia as well. This is an interesting issue, particularly in Addis Ababa and Ethiopian cities where land is nationally owned, and how we actually deal with some of the planning challenges and along with it, the service delivery challenges. Feel free to chime in.
Can I invite Liko to speak, because he was involved in 2 of the structure plans for Addis Ababa. I don't know if you will be comfortable speaking, but then the fact that land is publicly owned has its own benefits, as we have heard from our one of the participants. But then it has been very difficult when translating it into the ground, because one big issue is finance, I would say. So how do you provide infrastructure? How do you enforce the plans that you have put in place, particularly when there are political changes that completely deviate from what the structure plan kind of sets for the city to follow? So these are some of the challenges that I can talk. But then, Liko, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but if you could share your experience, I think that would be a good opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I think the strategies from the thesis can be good for adapting to make cities more inclusive. But yeah, it's important to create network at different levels and know the specific point of intervention to somehow deal with the governance aspect. Planning largely is a conventional blueprint approach in our context, and with little leverage, I can say, like the master planning in terms of this managing the land, dealing with informality and these things. But I think it's important to somehow create a place-based and project-based interventions like in our case, more important programs where having more attention at higher level officials, like the housing condominium programs, which was largely top-down programs, and it was widely implemented. But I think towards more action-oriented and participatory projects, like action-oriented, place-based project can be more effective in terms of generating lessons and through engagement with the different stakeholders. I think in that sense, it might be more effective, especially in the context of Addis Ababa. Yeah, that's just what I. Yeah, that's just my opinion, and from the experience that I have through engaging in the master plans in 2 different projects of the master plan in Addis Ababa.
Thank you, Liku. That's very helpful. And as we had mentioned at the start, Liku is also working with us on coming up with strategies. And here again, we're looking in a very integrated way across the land development issues, the water, the sanitation issues of how we're trying to work on a framing paper to highlight how African cities can become more water resilient. And it's interesting to see so many of these issues we're talking about, you know, how the access issues at the very local and community level all relate back up to the upstream issues of climate risk and water scarcity. And although cities and city regions are not considering it in this holistic way, considering this set of issues, how might we be able to frame the challenge in a way that allows for that action to occur at every scale and creates a governance mechanism to allow that to happen. We're trying to write about this new work that we've done. So Liku, your experience is really appreciated. I want to, we have just about 30 minutes or so before we'll want to wrap up. And we've been talking about the issue of, strategic planning and the land issues. It's absolutely crucial. Like I mentioned, one of our themes is how land and how we manage and plan for land is central to the delivery in an integrated way of so many of these urban services. We're talking about improving the coverage, the access to them. But we have many other questions that came up during discussion so far in the presentation, just about the data. Shoaib made this interesting point also about how data collection can happen, but it needs to be purposeful. And one of the things we talk about also is, unless there is capacity at the city level to use that data to inform policy making, is it really helpful? There's points about data. There's this point that has come up now a few times about how do you embrace the informal, integrate the informal across different services, recognizing that they fulfill a major gap in the city. There's several of these, and I would like to turn it over to Robin to probe deeper into some of these questions. You may see, Robin, that the first question is already sort of discussion we were having, but I'm going to share my screen again. Just let me know if you see it. Do you see my screen, Robin?
Not yet.
Can I add a point until we get?
Please
Robin?
go ahead.
In the presentation in relation to housing, one of the challenges that cities in Ethiopia face is the transition of livelihood of people in both during redevelopment and expansion of urban areas. So when urban areas expand, what cities are expected to do and what they practice doing is pay compensation. But what's the most challenging and most probably resulted in the conflict that we see is the livelihood of the people used to depend on land, and then they're paid compensation. But then the next step, how do they start their livelihood separate from land? So what do they do? How do they keep living? How do they keep earning income? These are the challenges that cities are facing. Compensations for different cultural reasons are consumed like in a year or two. All the money that these farmers have are gone. And then they have no way of earning their income. So this is the biggest challenge that cities in Ethiopia are facing: how to transition land-based dependency, land-based income generation for households to a non-land or separate from land activities. It's the same for inner city redevelopments as well. Location-based income is what most low-income, informal economy, as you have said, are dependent on. So the city, for instance, Addis has kept to a certain extent to keep those people within the same site. What it hasn't done is, with the change in how the relationships they have with the space, they don't know how to earn their income. So these are some of the things that are challenging, that maybe could be one thing that we can look into going further. Thank you.
So
thank you, Eleni. Yeah,
Eleni,
over to you, Robin.
So Eleni, that's really useful, right? In terms of talking about then the links between planning and implementation of plans and the broader economy, right? And the links to economic development and shared prosperity that can happen as a result of that. Some of that, and that's sort of a broader over question that then we tried to look at sort of a little bit more specifically in these different buckets of questions that we have here that I think were on the agenda that was shared with everybody before the meeting. So there are issues of strategic planning and urban land management, but then moving into data and what can be useful, finance, how both public investment and private or public targeting of public expenditure, as well as private or leveraging and catalyzation of private resources can be brought in to help address this. Then sort of integrating the formal and informal. And that's where I think a lot of the issues that are related to the economy really stem, right? From understanding an economy where services and income often come from very informal modes of production and distribution into something that is more formal, or that may not even be totally formal, but is moving more towards something that fits into a broader system than just the land-based income and livelihoods that were generated. And so one of the questions, and then, excuse me, in terms of some of the other buckets of political commitment and coalitions, one of the things that really came through in all of our case studies, as Anjali noted, was that political commitment and vision that lasts beyond one political leader, although one political leader is very necessary often, sort of to help trigger activities, sort of how some of those visions can be maintained across changes in political leaders and sometimes political regimes even, sort of can use private and especially community-based coalitions and actors to move forward. And I think that some of what Fred mentioned earlier and what Schweib mentioned, as well as sort of the work that they've done, has really focused on that, those alignments of community actors sort of in ways to sort of help continue moving progress forward. Another bucket is in terms of thinking about the prioritization of actions, and some of that was sort of reflected, I think, in the questions that I had earlier sort of to Jane, but we know that there are so many needs that are unmet in these cities that, how do you decide where to focus first and how to sequence things and how to maintain the relatively limited political space that you may have, and to capitalize on moments when there is the ability sort of to move forward. So those are some of the many questions and themes that we're exploring in our synthesis work now that we'd love to hear your comments on. We've gotten some very good input so far, but it would be interesting to hear sort of anybody sort of views on any of these specific areas, both in terms of work that that is underway, and examples that you have of cities or communities or groups that are addressing any of these issues.
Thanks, Robin. And I'll just add for everybody, the spirit of these questions is really to the point that someone was making, maybe Fred earlier, that we've got all this information and knowledge, and we've got experience from people like yourselves working in specific cities. How can we start to come up with some findings and an agenda that drives action? You see a very high focus on the how do we do the data, how do we get the financing right, so that we can hear your examples and really start to think about how we drive action based on the research that.
I'd say another of the things that we're quite interested in is finding out if you think that there's misinformation that's out there, and that the way that we or other people might be approaching things is sort of misled, or sort of is conceived in a way that is not as effective as it could be because of some of the misinformation that is out there.
And maybe we can start with the first question. Sorry, we meant to have animation on this slide where we could have had a question appearing one after the other. It's all here now. Feel free to chime in on any one of them, but we could just begin, with that first question there. How do you start to integrate some of the community level data, the ground up data for smarter planning? How do you bring it to the attention of decision makers? What are the capacities that currently exist for this? What is needed? Any good examples? Here again, I'm maybe if Kofi might be able to chime in, somebody from the planning, city planning level, but also somebody like Jane who works with communities. How are you bringing those streams of data together for that kind of collaborative planning exercise?
On our side, one of the things that we have done is that as part of the SDI network, we've been able to develop very, very high capacity to collect very accurate data very fast. And I think over the years, one of the things that we realized that just having data is not enough. That you needed to interpret that data in a way that speaks to policymakers. And so in the last eight years, we've worked with IDRC, and universities from both here, local universities and international universities. And we combine our data collection skills with the ability of universities to frame the issues that arise in a manner that speaks to policymakers. So for instance, one of the things we did in Mukuru is we discovered that almost the public sector is completely lacking in Mukuru. So we have a situation where we have the private sector completely unregulated. So if you want to see what the private sector looks like when it's unregulated, you go to Mukuru, and you'll discover then that it is efficient. The sector is efficient, it's able to provide services. It basically filters services from the public sector and sells those services to the people of Mukuru, but at very exorbitant prices. So the University of Strathmore was able to frame that issue in a way that captured the imagination of the county government by telling the county government that the people of Mukuru suffer a poverty penalty. Not only are they paying for are they suffering because they are poor and are not getting services, but they're also paying more for everything and getting much lesser services. And they were able to inform the county that within that poverty penalty was an opportunity, because it's not that poor people don't pay for services. It is that they're deprived of services by the state, but they could pay if those services were made available, and they could get a much better product and more quantity than they were currently getting from the middlemen or the cartels that run these services. So that captured the imagination of the city, and we were able then to persuade the city to declare Mukuru as a special planning area because of that opportunity. I don't know whether that answers that question.
Yeah, I'd say that's a great example, right? So I mean, having the data is important, and SDI's work sort of at coming up with methods, sort of in assistance in training, sort of to help people gather it is great, and that's helpful. But until it really could be presented in a way that that just sort of grabbed the attention of the policymakers, it wasn't as useful. And so I think that some of that is understanding how we can combine this locally community-led data generation with some of the more sort of top-down kinds of data gathering that may happen through census level, or now some of the work that we're seeing sort of coming through satellites and things, some of the work that Anjali sort of has tapped into in looking at sort of how cities are growing in different ways. Are there other examples of cases like that? and sort of that we can learn from. Because I think that the Merkur example is really great. Are there other examples in other countries? And I see that Kofi said that he can't speak because his background is noisy, but it's important in handling planning and urban management. It's crucial to look especially at tenure. And so those land, so the cadasters can become very, very important, as well as understanding some of the more traditional ways of land tenure, but also sort of livelihood generation and income that often is not necessarily captured by some of the data.
Yeah, on the data, you were just asking, Robin, I wonder, Shoaib, if you might be able to share some of your work. I know you work on remote sensing and, produce that kind of data for Kampala, but you're also working with, looking at neighborhood level access to services and informal settlements. How do you in your work, and if you can speak, about how you interact with the city and bring together these different scales of data to shed light on the challenge and then to come up with solutions. One of the points we make here is how we need to kind of make sure we're harnessing the revolution out there in terms of spatial data and remote sensing data that's available and bringing it together with the more bottom-up.
Yeah, thanks, Anjali. On data, thanks for bringing up the Kampala case. As you mentioned, we work with the remote sensing data, and the entry point was to work on an inventory of the natural assets within the city for purposes of utilizing the ecology of the city to address issues to do with climate risk, increasing climate risk, but also opportunities for employment. That work is still ongoing. But at the same time, we're also working with different communities, and they are different social business groups. And we collect quite very disaggregated community level, household level data. And we work within the Urban Action Lab as a platform, work together with the municipal authorities, in this case, in particular, Kampala Capital City Authority. We will also work with some of the municipalities around the Kampala City region, like Machinge, Sabagabo, and even Entebbe. And we use GIS to integrate this household level data with the mapping that we are doing on different aspects. So there's right now an active project where we are addressing, working on water issues, water access, water demand, and water supply across the entire city region, and to make that integration of data purposeful, because the Urban Action Lab is a platform working with these people in the collection of the data and having discussions in the process of collecting this data enables the city municipal authorities to appreciate what challenges that communities are facing, but it also provides a platform for the community members to voice their challenges and their aspirations and innovative ways through which the municipality could work on different aspects of service delivery and utilities, in this case, sanitation and water services. We've also collected quite a lot. I mean, again, through this platform, the Kampala Capital City Authority is the institution. It has resources. It has quite a number of projects. So we've been able to access data that they have collected on inventory of pit latrines in the entire city. They are also doing an inventory of all trees from natural asset project, let's say, that is yet to be completed, and a couple of other things on which they have collected data, and they share that with us. We analyze it to make it purposeful, depending on what their needs are, because that is the main one of the main objectives of the Urban Action Lab, to prioritize research with the different stakeholders, conduct that research that is purposeful to enable some changes that might be done in immediate terms, but also start to think about medium and even long-term decisions that have to be made. So we're working on greenhouse gas emissions, tracking of renewable energy and energy briquettes with Kampala Capital City Authority. They have built they call them bio toilets, different from the ones that Fred was describing earlier. about 11 primary public schools, but they are expanding that to almost 30 primary and secondary schools that they manage. And we are periodically tracking the generation of the gas from our Action Lab, that we provide that data to them to be able to calculate the emission savings that they make by constructing and use of those toilets. At the same time, also compare that as a differential with what would otherwise be emitted if the schools used tons of wood fuel every week or every month, or tons of charcoal. So you can see that the data is embedded within the kind of daily life experiences in the municipality, but also communities and institutions like schools. And that is what I meant by making it purposeful. And this, I imagine, would be different from different cities, because different cities have different profiles, different challenges, and different governance regimes. In this context, I'm thinking about the comment earlier about land and the centrality of ownership, the government ownership of land in Addis. So that would call for perhaps a slightly different approach and entry points to what is purposeful within each of those particular cities, just as an example. So that is what we are doing in the Urban Action Lab for the moment. Yeah.
It's really helpful. Thank you. In terms of sort of moving, I think, sort of beyond the data, one of the areas that clearly has been brought up a lot, sort of earlier today, and in many of the discussions that we've had, is finance, of how cities can utilize finance to make services more accessible and affordable. That often, is in several examples that were presented earlier, services might be there, but they're not affordable necessarily to large numbers of folks within the population. And this is another area where we're really looking for examples, and that I'd say, I think that we've heard some examples sort of on data on finance. It's been much harder for us to find sort of good examples of things that have worked. And so this is sort of another area that we're quite interested in hearing about, both from the community level as well as from city level and national level officials, sort of in terms of what kinds of resources can be tapped into and what kind of innovative financial instruments and combinations of pools of resources can be used and structured to meet these different needs. So I don't know if we still have any of the folks that were working at sort of at national level or local level governments. Sort of.
It looks like, Fred, you have your hand raised again.
Oh, great.
I don't know if you want to just go ahead and speak, or if that was from before.
I think that was from before, and I think part of what I had wanted to say, Swipe had already met the points that I wanted to say, and I just want to emphasize something around data. We, as Act Together and the Slum Dwellers Federation, have a saying that information is power. And we always have something else that says, when you know how to use it. And this is my own reflection after going through the entire process of collecting data, sharing it, and I realized that different entities at different levels are collecting data. Government is collecting data, civil society is collecting data, the community is also collecting data, but the key really, the key point really has to be around how this data is being used, because then we realize that the government and the civil society are actually collecting the same kind of data, which is duplicating of resources. Duplicating of services and resources. So if this data can be readily available at platforms, and like Shreb mentioned, they are, as Urban Action Lab, they're already sharing this data with the city authority. And I think that more of such interaction need to be encouraged so that we can optimally use data that we have, and then we identify what the gaps are before we can get into more data collection. I think that's the point that I really wanted to make. Thank you.
Great, that's sort of really helpful. In terms of sort of the data that there is and how it's used, I don't know if the city officials are, if we don't have as many of them on, or if they have fewer examples. This is an area that maybe, Roger, you can talk a little bit about how UN Habitat in the past has used these and some of the experiences that you've had in the African context.
Hello?
Yes. You were speaking and then it got muted again.
Sorry, I didn't hear the full elaboration. I was cut from the.
Oh, sure. If you could just talk about some of the experiences that you had and some of the examples that you saw, both on the data side as well as the finance side, so from your UN Habitat engagements with different cities in Africa.
Mm. Well, you know, on the data side, I see that it's relevant for many places that bringing data together or integrating data or having the right layers of data at hand is very complex everywhere. Many cities always say, yeah, we have the data. Yes, somehow they have the data, but how do you kind of bring it together in meaningful data? That is one thing. But the second thing is that what are the, let's say, I've worked with a lot of cities discussing what are the kind of the basics that we need in terms of geospatial data, the basics that we need to cut through some of the complexities and give us 2 or 3 hinges of where to move. It's very interesting if you, for example, look at the systems of the city, if you look at where the growth takes place and where the flood areas are, or how you want to maintain food systems in the city regional space, it gives you a couple of these kind of layers that you want to bring together in order to provide entry points for an evidence-based decision making. I've also seen for the recollection of the others, I worked a lot a lot in the East Africa, South Africa, and West Africa side, so not so much in Central Africa. And the data availability, there's a very, very big difference in what the data availability actually is in the different countries and cities. And especially, and you made that point already, the link between the geospatial data and the socioeconomic data is very complex. Though, having said that, we have been working with a lot of cities and using open data and big data that is, well, more open data. Big data is a little bit different, but a lot of open data that is available in order to shape key layers of geospatial data for first discussions and strategic consideration, and even for some initial modeling. This is not the modeling that you do that gives you a 98% accuracy. This is the modeling that you do that gives you maybe an 85 to 90%, 90+% of accuracy. But it's also the modeling that is very important to understand the big shifts and the areas in which growth, for example, or densification or development takes place. So that is one thing that is on the data. So there's a huge opportunity to use these open data sources, and there's a huge opportunity ever more to use the machine learning and the big data sources to enter into a policy discussion around strategic consideration. So that is one point I want to make. And the second point is on finance. There is, and I really want to be, I don't want to be unspecific, but it counts again, it's globally, because I think a lot of views on how to deal with urbanization issues in in the context of of Africa, which is of course it's too much of a big bucket, but are very similar to other places. And one of the key issues is of course the lack of the unclear link between the planning and finance. So how can you go through a planning process, identify a set of priority issues, and how to link that to finance? And finance, that means finance, when I talk about finance, I'm talking about two things. One is how can you unlock capital to really invest into transformative projects that change the physical structure of cities. And the second one is that if you do that, how can you capture the value of the land that you just the value that you just have unlocked, land value capture mechanism. These are somehow two approaches to finance. One is much more on the project and the infrastructure finance. How do you bring that in a meaningful way together with a kind of perspectives on urban planning and development? And the second is much more on the urban management. How do you roam? How do you take the value of your interventions and bring that back into city space? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. Robin, I'm just going to add a question here before we move to the next topic.
We also have a couple of comments just to make sure we get the comments in the chat.
Kofi wants to speak.
Sure. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes, Kofi. Kofi is still showing you as muted.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
Good. So most of the example I've shared relates to that of Ghana specifically, but it applies to a lot of African countries in the sense that land use itself is, it doesn't matter the one who owns the land, but those who use the land. Normally we deal with a lot of ownership data regarding urban land. And on the ground is something different that happens together. When it comes to the data management and the administration of land, in Ghana, for instance, it's kept at the national and regional level, which means the municipality themselves don't have access to the data of people that own the land within the urban space. So it becomes very difficult to do a proper comprehensive management. So these land agencies have to be decentralized to the municipal levels that can be able to have direct access to whoever owns land within the municipality. The disjoint between the cost systems as to land litigation regarding who owns the land, there's a disjoint. Every time there is always court decisions made on the ownership of a particular land. But this same information does not transcend into the land sector agency that does the administration of these urban lands. And this actually leads to a lot of conflicts regarding who really owns land. So 2 points. We look at the ownership, that's okay, but the use, like people can use cars that is not registered in their name. Sometimes those who use the land have more power compared to the person who owns it. And then the decentralization of the land administration to the municipal level, because that's where 100% of the actions in terms of urban development, the infrastructure you see happens at the municipal level. If we're able to connect this gap, we'll achieve a lot of impact regarding urban land management.
Thank you, Kofi. Can I just ask a follow-up question while we can hear you still? So you talked very important points, focusing on the use of land and then trying to decentralize the land development. In your role, I believe you handle physical planning. Is it at the national level in Ghana? I'm trying to understand how you tie together the land issues with the integrated sort of service provision issues. Could you be able to talk to us a little bit about how land management works and how you're trying to change things alongside delivery of water services, sanitation services, streets, and so on. Just does that happen in an integrated way? And if not, what are you trying to work towards? Ghana, a little share.
Thank you very much. We are trying to work towards the ideal. In the past, we have a lot of agencies that dealt in land. We had the survey and mapping division, which is on its own. We have the evaluation aspect. We have the public invested lands aspect. These were working on their own. And then we have the administrator of true lands, the land that belongs to, customary, and then the chiefs and private lands. However, we thought it wise to bring these agencies together because it becomes so difficult to implement just a single project on water and sanitation that cut across a lot of districts. So these agencies have been put together under one umbrella, and then they will have a link with the land use and spatial planning where I work that will provide all the planning services, and then these land sector agents will be able to use. However, the disconnect is that most of these water and sanitation projects are being implemented by the municipalities themselves, which are autonomous, and they need to collaborate based on joint planning boards to be able to implement some projects. At the national level, the government have thought it wise to create kind of a development boards for many municipalities, and they have the capacity and power to, do many projects that cut across a lot of districts. However, the land data is still not in the hands of these development authorities, which we have for now that cut across a lot of regions and then municipalities. What we are working towards on is that we have come up with a platform, geospatial platform, that is able to integrate data that we request from the land sector agencies at the regional level, at the municipality level, so that we can be able to keep those information. These are not for hard issues like mortgage, but we as a municipality need to know who owns what land. And we're doing a kind of a pilot to make sure it succeeds. Since 2001 until now, this land administration project have been ongoing, and we want to make sure we achieve greater strength in it. It is better, a little bit better now than then, and with provision of services like water and sanitation, these are mostly done in areas where we have, public lands, and the fast rate of urban development actually outpace these service provisions. But the point is that in supplying some of these services to some of these already developed areas, we have a very big challenge because we need to, pass through individual lands, individual parcels, which makes it difficult. What we thought as much was to lay the infrastructure already, like with the project we were doing in Ngo Pram, which is the annex of Accra, the capital city, lay the infrastructure, bring all the landowners, which government of course owns a big chunk of land, lay optic fiber, see where the roads will pass, and then the major utilities that will support the community to become a business district, will be able to provide them. So we've been working on a lot of ideals, even though there are big changes that is happening at the national level, but on the municipal level is where we face a little bit challenge. But in our own small way, we are trying to make sure there's that kind of connect between. Fortunately for us, the mayor of our city has become a member of the board at the regional level. So every transaction on land, he knows. But as to the data connection with the municipality, that's where we need to work on a little bit. And it will achieve a lot of results for us so that we can be able to ensure that land is made available for all without leaving any place, anyone out.
Thank you. That's sort of really super interesting. We've got two long, sort of nice detailed comments that were in the chat box from Mokam and from Liku.
Sorry, Robin.
Yes,
Robin,
sure.
Maybe just to, before you go there, just one remark on what Kofi has been saying, but also something that kind of came through in the other discussions is the kind of the city regional context in which urbanization takes place in Africa. Also, this is relevant across in many continents, but if you see the rapid place in the horizontal way that that cities are growing, really spreading out across municipal boundaries, of course, say something about how you deal with how you deal with data. If you look at Johannesburg, the municipal boundary of Johannesburg, and if you look at the actual functional city of Johannesburg, which is kind of pretty much twice as big as it grows as an omelette over the borders. And so I think it's really interesting to look much more in a kind of a systemic approach across borders, leading to a lot of complications, but I'm very, very excited to hear, Kofi, that there are decision makers that somehow that some are able to kind of to monitor what's happening on both sides of the borders. So.
No, and I mean, that's a real challenge in terms of the data. It's a challenge in terms of finance and how sort of money gets allocated and shared, and governance in terms of who makes the decisions that really are going to impact sort of that whole growing area, especially if you sort of add the other layer sort of ecosystem services and think just about water and watersheds and riversheds sort of that complicate that and that need to be addressed at these broader areas as well as at the municipal level. So just wanted to make sure that we sort of paid attention to some of what was put in the chat. Luku talks about issues of integrated planning and working with community as a wicked problem, that building trust is one important issue, but also mentioned in his previous comment, universities as partners can help as an entry point to start working with the community, but it's important to ensure that communities really benefit and that they see what those benefits are through the engagement from the start. From his experience engaging in multiple research projects in the university, communities are facing participation fatigue with no real tangible benefits. And I think we've heard that sort of in other work as well. Mocom also sort of apologizes for not being able to participate actively and said to share the case study and interest that Bamenda is an emerging city, which is third largest city in Cameroon. At the moment, the city is caught up in a civil crisis, but despite this, the planning authorities are striving to ensure integrated planning. Integrating formal or informal services and actions to formal is challenging, given that chaos is sort of the norm. And for this, the major milestone so far is to actually have an active participatory planning tool when planning in all sectors, and that helps build trust, and building trust within the local communities has helped them access data aside from identifying shared priority solutions. And that this has been evident in their approach addressing urban housing for the poor, public space management, public space development, and waste management.
I just wanted to check, Maria, we have been recording this, right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, no, there's been so much rich feedback. I mean, even just what Robin just read from the chat box. There are so many things to get through, as you can imagine, so many points we're really trying to tackle in the synthesis report. So I think, but we're also very much at the end of our time, and it's been such an incredibly rich discussion. I really wish we could have done this over the 2-day period as opposed to squeezing it into 3 hours. But here is, one last question I kind of want to, in the spirit of next steps, I want to leave us with this. How, if you all have ideas on how we can continue to engage you, we're writing this work up now, but over the next 5 to 6 months, you will be working on the synthesis report. There will be continued plans to engage with audiences like yourselves, and we may launch the final report around the September-October timeframe. But I just want to encourage you to please stay in touch. Bring any work you've been doing to our attention. We will keep you posted as we develop drafts of this and work further on the key themes and share that back out. Any final thoughts from anybody? I also just maybe Ani might like to add some last words before we end. Everybody has really contributed, I think, very enthusiastically in this discussion. We heard some great comments here today. Thank you so much from my side. Ani?
Thank you, Anjali, and thank you, everyone. First of all, I've been taking notes all the time. First of all, thank you so much for engaging on this, and thank you for your time. I'm actually very encouraged about this actually working. We were debating whether this format will work. Very encouraged. That at the same time, actually, I'm looking forward to holding this workshop sometime soon so we can actually dig more deep into things. The thing that struck me very much about many people's point, 3 points I want to raise, is this relation with actually taking action, like you heard from Kenya, you heard from Shraiv, taking action on the ground, getting communities organized, whether informal, and that is critically important, and not to overcomplicate the matter and actually move forward. Versus what Roger was talking about, is how do you help move this local action to citywide thinking? Because I think all of us realize that if the cities don't think at least at a scale, it'll be impossible to solve the problem one community at a time, though that is absolutely critical. So I was very struck by the discussion. I would love to dig in. It's absolutely obvious to us, Anjali, the question of land ownership, the complexity of land ownership in different national contexts, how that comes into city and how cities are planned, and now what recommendations we have are critical. And finally, not finally, but also the question of data, which we have kind of debated a lot with, as you saw from our question. We think that's a kind of a critical point, not only just city level data, but local data, but data has a potential to leapfrog somehow. Sorry to be using a cliched word. And the connection to these decision making at the local and city level to financing, how do you actually have a sustainable finance? So I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for participating. We absolutely will remain connected with you as we move this forward. The goal of this is not to just write a paper, as you know, a lot of you have participated in this last few years, is how do we actually bring this kind of a thinking to city leaders, decision maker, community leaders, so this kind of work can be used in framing our discussion going forward. So I think from us, I want to commit mine and the whole team's absolute commitment to move this forward with you. We will share this document as we go forward, but also I'm really hoping sometime soon this coronavirus thing will be behind us, and actually we can hold this kind of a discussion and action on the ground in cities in Africa. So thank you very much. And I just want to really thank Maria for pulling this together. I can't thank you enough, Maria, for doing that. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being with us this afternoon, and really looking forward to engaging with you further.
Thank you, Ani. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to the whole team here, Maria, Jillian, Robin. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Sorry, just quickly to mention, we've shared these slides in PDF format, but I'm happy to send them out again to anyone who didn't receive them yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.